zu dürfen. Die Veranstaltung wird auf Englisch sein, deswegen werde ich kurz auf Deutsch unseren Gast ein bisschen vorstellen. Ich werde dann danach auch noch ein paar allgemeine Infos zur Veranstaltung sagen. Zuerst einmal, Andrew Feinstein ist 1964 in Kapstadt in Südafrika unter der Apartheid noch geboren, als Sohn zweier Holocaust-Überlebender, hat dann in Kapstadt im kalifornischen Berkeley und in Cambridge studiert und sich spezialisiert in politischer Ökonomie. Nach dem Studium ist er Mitglied der ANC, also des African National Congress, des südafrikanischen Parlaments geworden, wo er unter Nelson Mandela arbeitete. Er war Mitglied des Finanzausschusses, leitete den Unterausschuss und war selbst stellvertretender Vorsitzender der Nationalen Rechnungsprüfungskommission. Als wichtiger politischer Wendepunkt ist dann zu nennen, dass nachdem 2015 die südafrikanische Regierung einen milliardenschweren Rüstungsdeal im Wert von 10 Milliarden Dollar abschloss, die ANC-Regierung sich gegen die ungehinderte Untersuchung der Affäre weigerte. Daraufhin legte Feinstein aus Protest sein Parlamentsmandat in Südafrika nieder und von da an widmete er sich der Aufdeckung von Korruption im Waffenhandel weltweit und wurde zu einem führenden Experten im Gebiet. 2011 erschien sein vielbeachtetes Buch The ShadowWorld, Inside the Global Arms Trade, das 2016 als Dokumentation verfilmt wurde, das enthüllt hat, wie Regierungen, Militäre, Geheimdienste, Rüstungskonzerne und der Waffenhandel eng miteinander verbunden sind und wie dieser Handel Korruption steigert, Demokratien eigentlich untergräbt und immenses menschliches Leid verursacht. Ausschnitte davon werden wir uns heute anschauen und Andrew Feinstein wird auch etwas dazu sagen, immer zu 4 Clips, glaube ich, wird ungefähr eine Stunde dauern. Wichtig zu erwähnen ist aber noch, dass Andrew Feinstein Geschäftsführer von ShadowWorld Investigations ist, einer Organisation, die systemische Korruption im globalen Rüstungshandel aufdeckt. Er ist außerdem in Beiräten mehrerer Organisationen aktiv, darunter die Platform to Protect Whistleblowers in Africa, Declassified UK und Lighthouse Reports. In Zeiten der extremen Aufrüstung und so viele Kriege in unserer Nähe ist es daher umso wichtiger für uns, dass wir eine global so präsente und wichtige Stimme heute in Graz begrüßen dürfen. Ich möchte außerdem im Namen der steirischen Friedensplattform ATTAC, Pax Christi, der Palästina-Solidarität und vor allem auch hier Claudia vom Palästina-Forum danken fürs Kommen und für die organisatorische Kooperation. Herzlichen Dank auch den neuen Inhabern des ehemaligen Restaurants Amos, die uns ihre Räumlichkeiten kostenlos zur Verfügung stellen. Herzlich willkommen, Andrew Feinstein, wir freuen uns.
Hallo, ich bin der Christoph von ATTAC, der Regionalgruppe Graz, und europaweit gibt es die Kampagne Stop We Arm You, und da geht es darum, dass die Milliarden, die Dutzenden Milliarden halt nicht in Aufrüstung, sondern besser in Bildung, Sozialleistung, Umwelt, Klima und so weiter viel besser investiert werden. Wir in Österreich haben jetzt eine Petition gestartet mit Friedensförderung und Sicherheit statt Aufrüstung. Das kann man online ganz mal auf der ATTAC-Homepage unterschreiben.
And thank you so much to the organizers, to Claudia and the forum. It's a great, I think this is the first time I've ever been in Graz. The only thing missing from the introduction, which told me certain things that I didn't know about myself, is that my mother was Austrian and Viennese. And as of about 3 weeks ago, I became an Austrian citizen. Yeah. So I am now both a South African and an Austrian citizen. And not many Austrians are allowed to hold dual citizenship. But because I got my Austrian citizenship in terms of the legislation, specifically for the descendants of victims of the Nazis, I am allowed to keep my original citizenship, which is South African. It also means that the British, when they get tired of me and my politics, they have a choice of where to deport me to. They can send me to South Africa, or they can send me to Austria now. And I will push for whichever country, depending on what time of the year it is. Because unfortunately, the work that we do at ShadowWorld Investigations isn't very popular in Britain. And the reason for that is quite simple. Britain is intimately involved in the global arms trade. And Britain has been a facilitator, enabler, and active participant in the genocide in Gaza. And the reason I say an active participant is because, amongst other things, Britain not only supplies weapons to Israel, but the Royal Air Force flies spy flights over Gaza that then passes intelligence on to the Israeli Defense Forces. In fact, Britain flies more flights for reconnaissance over Gaza than the Israelis themselves do. And that information is used for targeting. And as we've seen, that targeting includes massive war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law. It's also the reason why I've never tried to apply for British citizenship, even though I've been able to get British citizenship for over 20 years now. I must also apologize, particularly to my late mother, that my German is not good enough for me to speak to you in German. But fortunately, I speak very slowly, so hopefully you'll find it easy to follow my English. So, I wrote this book called The ShadowWorld. It first came out at the end of 2011. It's now in its 10th edition, and it's important to note.
Ist jemand, der ganz schlecht Englisch versteht, da könnte man eine Flüsterübersetzung machen.
Das passiert schon.
Entschuldigung.
Thank you. When I wrote the book in 2011, it was the first book published on the global arms trade since 1979. So why is that the case? Why do so few people write about the trade or publish about the trade? Very simple. Everything that happens in the global arms trade happens behind a curtain of national security imposed secrecy. So it's incredibly difficult to get hold of the information. And the only reason I managed to do that is because when I was a member of parliament in South Africa and I investigated, as was mentioned earlier, a massively corrupt arms deal with my own country, which we'll show you a bit about in the film, I managed to get hold of every single document to do with that arms deal. I even got hold of the serviettes or napkins that at a dinner the representatives of the British arms company BAE Systems, along with Tony Blair and Prince Andrew, had negotiated with the South African ministers how much they needed in bribes for BAE Systems to get the contract. Eventually BAE paid 94 million rand in bribes on the South African. BAE Systems is Britain's largest weapons company. Also for many, many years the most corrupt company in the world. So I had all of this information and I published my first book, a book called After the Party, about what had happened to South Africa and how within a very short time after our democracy we were corrupted by Britain, Italy, France, and Spain, who were the other countries, and Germany, who won contracts on that deal. Because of publishing that book, people from all over the world started to approach me with information, including prosecutors from Austria, who at the time were trying to prosecute someone called Count Alphonse Menstorff Pouilly, who was the husband of a minister in the Austrian government. I don't recall her name. Exactly. Yeah. So I was investigating the husband, and there was a prosecutor, a very brave prosecutor in Vienna, who wanted to charge him with corruption. But the senior prosecutor here didn't want him charged. So I supported the Austrian prosecutor, and eventually I think they charged him with tax offenses or something, not with the corruption he should have gone to jail for. And this is the case everywhere in the world. But from working like that with prosecutors, with people in government, with people in militaries, with people in some of the weapons making companies, I managed to compile a huge amount of information about the trade in weapons. And that's what became the ShadowWorld. Now, in German, this is what it looks like.
Wow.
So one reviewer suggested it actually looks like a weapon of mass destruction just because of its size. The English version is slightly thinner because they printed it on much thinner paper.
Are you promoting reading in English than better in German?
No. Either, whichever you find easiest. But the point about it is that we wanted to get this information that had been secret for so long into the world. And so when the book came out, I was approached by producers, film producers in New York, an actor called Danny Glover, who some of you who are a bit older might have heard of. Interestingly, he made all of his money and his initial fame in a series of films called Lethal Weapon, but has done better films later on in his career than that. And Danny and his company made this film with a director called Johan Montres and myself. Now Johan, who is Belgian, is an absolutely brilliant filmmaker. His current film, which is called Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, was recently nominated for an Oscar. And you really should try and see it. The film that you're about to see now of the ShadowWorld, Johan and I spent 5.5 years making. And it's won various awards all over the world, but far more important than that, it's been shown sometimes in huge theaters with hundreds of people, sometimes to groups even smaller than this. Once in a city called Hull in the north of England, I drove all the way from London to show the film, and there was the organizer of the screening, and there was one other man. That was the audience. And so I said to the other man, "Why have you come to watch this film?" And he said to me, "What film?" And I sort of looked at him and said, "Well, what are you doing here?" He said, "I'm homeless and it's raining outside, so I thought I'd come inside." But he claims to have quite enjoyed the film. So it was good. We have shown the film to community audiences around the world. I traveled 25,000 miles in the UK showing the film. Because of course, in a country like Britain, the public broadcaster and mainstream cinemas would not show a film like this. Interestingly, in the United States, the public broadcaster did show the film. They showed it across 1,400 television stations across the US, but not in Britain. The BBC wouldn't show it.
When was that?
So the film first came out in 2016, in April of 2016. So it's been around for 10 years now. And we still, as you're seeing today, we still use the film as a tool to talk about the global arms trade and to talk about what is going on in the world today. So we're going to show you 4 short extracts from the film. If you want to see the full film, it's available on YouTube for free, although the producers don't know that. So as long as it's up there, go onto YouTube, just search ShadowWorld film, and make sure you see the 94-minute one. The 94-minute one, because other people have put their own versions that they've edited themselves onto YouTube, and you can see the whole film there. So the first extract we're going to show you is the opening of the film. And there's a speech very early on that is someone called General Smedley Butler. And Butler was a very senior commander in the American Marines. And he talks about what it means to be an American soldier.
responsible for the deployment of thousands of young Americans to battle in a distant land. Some will kill, and some will be killed. And so I come here with an acute sense of the costs of armed conflict, filled with difficult questions about the relationship between war and peace, and our effort to replace one with the other.
Los científicos dicen que estamos hechos de átomos, pero a mí un pajarito me contó que estamos hechos de historias.
They were 5 months into World War I. Both sides were in trenches. They were just mass slaughter across the landscape. Men were standing up sleeping. They were in their own feces. And their dead comrades were sitting there in no man's land. They couldn't even get them and bring them back for burial. It was Christmas Eve, and the German High Command sent little Christmas trees. It was like a stage set. All of a sudden, across the German front, you saw these little Christmas trees lighting up. And then the Allies heard Silent Night being sung by the Germans and started applauding. And then all of a sudden, a couple of guys on both sides get out of the trenches and start walking toward each other.
And expecting any moment to fall flat with the machine guns opening up, and nothing happened. And within 2 hours, we were walking about and laughing and talking, and there was nothing from the German lines.
Hundreds get out of the trenches. Then thousands get out of the trenches, and they embraced each other. 100,000 men.
Oh, no man's land, as far as we could see, was grey and khaki. There they were smoking and talking, shaking hands, exchanging names and addresses after the war to write to one another.
Everybody back in your trenches, you know, and shouting. The generals behind must have seen it and got a bit suspicious. So what they did, they gave orders for a battery of guns behind us to fire. And officers fired their revolvers at the jerrys, you know. Because that started the war again. Oh, we were crushing them to hell.
This was the war to end all wars. This was the war to make the world safe for democracy. At least 21,000 new millionaires were made in the U.S. Billions and billions of dollars would be piled up by a few. Munition makers, shipbuilders, meat packers. And let us not forget the bankers who financed the Great War, who turned blood into gold. And their profits were as secret as they were immense. All of them are looking ahead to war.
So, there are two fundamental things that drive the global trade in weapons. The one is that there will always be war, that it's human nature. But the reality is, when it's down to the people who have to actually fight the wars, because it's never the politicians or the financiers or the industrialists who fight the wars. It's ordinary people, usually working class people. And when they have the opportunity, like happened that Christmas Eve, they don't have any animosity towards each other. They're just being told to kill. And why? Well, as Smedley Butler says, war is big business. There are three things that are absolutely certain in war. The first victim in any war is the truth, even before anybody is killed. You know that we are being lied to whenever there is conflict. The second thing is that in addition to the human beings who lose their lives, their homes, their livelihood, the environment is going to suffer irreparable damage from the conflict. And the third thing is, there are going to be people making billions and billions of dollars out of the conflict. America and Israel and Britain's ongoing attack on Iran, there were bombings again yesterday, has so far cost the United States of America over $68 billion. That money doesn't go nowhere. It goes to the weapons companies and to everyone associated with them. The book we're working on at the moment, called Making a Killing, How the West Profits from Slaughter in Gaza and Yemen, shows, and I can't give you the figure yet until the book is published, but shows the tens of billions of dollars that people have made on the genocide in Gaza. And we identify all of who those people are, from the politicians, to the governments, to the corporate executives, the companies, the arms dealers or middlemen or intermediaries, the lawyers, the management consultants, the transport companies, the auditing firms. They all make huge, huge amounts of money out of conflict. And crucially, the trade in weapons is the most corrupt trade there is. It accounts for around 40% of all corruption in all world trade. And while some of that corruption will go to whoever is buying the weapons, be it in Saudi Arabia or Israel or the United Arab Emirates, a whole lot of it comes back to people in the selling countries as well, including the political parties and individual politicians, officials and military leaders. And rather than me explain that to you, I'm going to let an arms dealer explain it to you. A guy called Riccardo Profiteure, who is an Italian arms dealer, who when we interviewed him, we didn't realize, we interviewed him in a place called Bad Ragaz in Switzerland. He was on the run, having been sentenced to 7.5 years in jail in Portugal for a corrupt arms dealer. And I'll explain to you what happened with him once we hear what he has to say about the arms trade.
There's only two things that count in business, my friend. Money and sex. The rest, you can write as much as you like. It's absolute garbage. You can make a weapon beautiful, depends on your secretary. Because they're more distracted looking at your secretary's ass and thinking what the hell you're talking about. And that is sometimes all the edge you need. Agency called Blue Orchids because of the special taste of the Chief of Staff of the Army, who liked blonde with silicone tits. We had their Secretary of the Embassy come and review the photos, and he said, I want this one, I want this one, I want this one, I want this one. I had the girls arrive one day before. I said, girls, I know you've all been paid handsomely for this, but do me a favor, if you get any pillow talk that is relevant, please bring it across, because I could use it. And for each interesting information, I will give out a 2,000 euro bonus. So with 60 grand, I signed a contract worth 3 million. So it wasn't a bad deal.
And then my phone rang again. And it was another whistleblower. And he said, you have no idea what it is that you're getting into here. And he said, this slush fund is much, much bigger than you realize. Our job was to look after the really high-level people. Those who used to come to England who were being bribed, essentially, by BAE were people at the level of the head of the Saudi Air Force, who was a royal prince. We would fly them to Los Angeles and they would buy cars and dresses, and it wasn't shopping like you and I would think. In the end, when they gathered together all their shopping, we would charter an entire jumbo jet to fly it all back to Saudi Arabia.
It was in the attempt to try and trace through the bank accounts who the ultimate beneficiaries are that the case became really very serious, as the trail appeared to lead towards senior members of the Saudi royal family.
The most outrageous example was that BAE, in order to smooth the way with Prince Bandar, at one point made him a present of a huge commercial airliner, all of his very own, which he promptly had painted in the grey and silver colours of the Dallas Cowboys, who were his favourite American team. And he used to fly around in that quite cheerfully.
The case centred on establishing the ultimate beneficiaries of exceptionally large amounts of money paid by British Aerospace for consultancy services.
There's evidence that Mark Thatcher, this is Thatcher's son, got 12 million in cash for his work as a fixer.
This is the starting out bill. It's okay, it's all blue. Don't worry. It's a very beautiful weapon, it's Austrian made. If you want to sell on the market, and you're looking probably at about 3,500 euros.
And why do you keep it in the house?
Because I'm a soldier.
And you can do that legally?
Yes and no, but yeah, more or less you can. As long as it's in the house. And you don't shoot the cat of the neighbor. I've got nothing against money. I don't mind paying bribes to politicians. It's part of the deal. The thing about politicians is that they're very much like prostitutes, but only more expensive. The politics is dictated by the whims of the arms industry. Politicians are nothing more than sales reps, my dear friend. They have as much power as a middle-ranking executive in Lockheed Martin, At the end of the day, they do what they're told.
So the deal that journalist between Riccardo Profiteure, a chap called David Lee, who was investigations editor at The Guardian, the deal he was talking about was something called the Al Yamamah deal between Britain and Saudi Arabia. £6 billion of bribes were paid. Billion with a B. And they were paid, as was said, to members of the royal family, but also to Margaret Thatcher's son. Huge amounts were donated to the Conservative Party through one of the middlemen involved. And that's the way it works. So crucial to the trade is that it keeps money flowing in our political systems. In the United States, it's of a totally different order to Britain. In the United States, it's all legal. It's a form of legalized bribery. So people like me can track which companies have paid which politicians how much money, and what contracts those politicians have then ensured go back to that same company. So one of the reasons that we live in a world in which conflict is always more important than diplomacy is because our politicians, our corporate executives, our military and intelligence leaders, and all sorts of others are making huge, huge amounts of money out of war. And all of the conflicts that are currently going on in the world are exactly the same. Now, I'm obviously not saying that geopolitics doesn't play a very important part in this, but this is in addition to the geopolitics that determines the sorts of conflicts that are engaged in. To show the focus on resolving matters by conflict rather than diplomacy, it's worth bearing in mind that the United States government employs more people to run one aircraft carrier than it has diplomats across the entire world. And the US has 12 aircraft carriers. There used to be a time when the spending on defense and the spending on diplomacy was broadly equal. Now it's gone like that.
When was that?
When it was broadly equal. The 1976, 77, I think, was probably the last fiscal year when it was broadly equivalent. And from then, basically, since the advent of what we know as neoliberalism, when everything became deregulated, that's really when the shift started. Profiteure, who styles himself, he says, I'm a soldier. At one point we're interviewing him and he's sitting on a very low chair, and this guy's enormous. He had a belly that was probably one of the biggest bellies I've ever seen in my life, and it was literally, when he was sitting on the chair, his belly was resting on the floor. And Johann says to him, Riccardo, are there people who want to kill you? And this mammoth man looks up and he says to Johann, of course, hundreds of them. It's why I keep myself in such good shape. And you're sort of looking at this guy and you're thinking, 3 of us are going to have to help you get out of the chair. And like all the arms dealers I've met over the years, they live in this fantasy world. He describes himself as a soldier when he's playing around with the gun. He's never served in any military. But he's created these stories. He had 9 offices around the world. And in every country that he had an office, he would create a different story that was useful in that country. So in America, he'd fought with the Marines. In Nicaragua, against the Contras. In Britain, he'd fought with the SAS in the Falkland Islands, to the extent that he asked Johann if he could read us some of his poetry on camera. And he reads us this poem about these young Argentinians he was forced to kill in the Falklands. And tears are streaming down his face. And then in the context of South Africa, the first time I met him, I get into the car at Zurich airport, and he turns around and he says to me, "It's a good thing you're not any older." I said, "What do you mean?" So he said, "Well, if you were 10 years older, I would have probably been sent to kill you." I said, "So what are you talking about?" And he says, "No, I worked as an assassin for the apartheid South African assassination squads." You know, like, first of all, this is something I think was a good thing. Second of all, I mean, it's so obviously nonsense. But these people create whatever backstory is useful for them that they think is going to help them sell more weapons. And at one point, even while he was on the run, while he was supposed to be in jail in Portugal, I managed to get his Swiss banker to see me. I mean, these people are all so stupid. You flatter them, and they start telling you things they really shouldn't be telling you. I got to look at his bank accounts, at his private bank in Zurich. And for many years, he was making between 3 and 5 million euros a month. Until he landed up, because they eventually caught up with it. So what happened was, my colleague Paul and myself go to do the final interviews with Ricardo. And we arrive in this funny little place called Bad Ragaz. We go to his office, it's all locked up. So we go to his flat, same thing. So I eventually get hold of his business partner and I say, "We had an arrangement to finish our filming with Ricardo today. Where is he?" He says, no, he's been arrested and he's already been deported back to Portugal. So I thought this was just a story, because I had hinted to him that I knew that he was lying about all sorts of things. And I thought he just didn't have the courage to actually face me and to have to face down the fact that I knew about all of his lies. But he had actually been arrested and was already on a plane on his way back to Portugal. So we had to do the final interview with him, was actually in a Portuguese jail. It took us months to get permission. And by the time we went to see him in jail, he lost 37 kilos. So in that sense, at least, being caught again was good for him. But nothing changed when I interviewed him in jail. It was astonishing. So when I confronted him with his various lies about South Africa, about America, about Britain, and with the fact that his wife and 2 adopted children he'd introduced me to in Vienna, in addition to them, I discovered he had a whole nother family in Britain of a woman and 2 children. And of course the 2 didn't know about each other. So when I started confronting him with all of this, it was just him and me in a little room in the prison, but the cameras were still rolling behind us. And I sat there next to him, his knees were sort of almost next to mine. And I said to him, "Ricardo, you've lied to me about this. And he said to me, "Andrew," in that weird accent of his, "as I'm looking you straight in the eye, I promise you I've never lied to you." But he has one glass eye, which is why he's never served in the military. And his glass eye was staring straight at the ceiling. So while he was telling me he was looking me straight in the eye, his one eye was actually looking in the ceiling. And that encapsulated not just him, but the people who are central to this arms trade. And you look at them and you think, yeah, these are sort of bottom feeders. These are the lowest of the low. This guy did deals for the Austrian government, for the British government, for the American government, for the Polish government, for the Portuguese government. So the very same people who are ensuring the corruption takes place, who are effectively creating this carapace of lies, are the very same people who do the deal at the most senior levels of the government-to-government global arms trade. Now in the next section we're going to hear a bit about the deal that I tried to investigate when I was a member of parliament in South Africa. Sorry, you wanted to ask
I
that?
just wanted to ask, how did you get him to do the interview with you?
So I have a huge number of degrees, not because I'm very smart, but because it was the only way I could stay out of serving in the apartheid military while I was growing up in South Africa. If you studied, you'd get military deferment. So I have 3 degrees in clinical psychology. I qualified as a clinical psychologist. And then I have degrees in economics and politics after that. And somehow, and I have no idea how, I managed to get people to talk to me. You know, Menstorff Pui should never have spoken to me. It was insane. He was under investigation here and in Britain when I interviewed him. Never been interviewed before. He had with him his lawyer when I interviewed him. And he got so full of himself that he started telling me things, and they didn't realize that I spoke some German. So she was saying to him, don't say that, talk about this stuff rather. And he couldn't help himself. He was just talking and talking and talking, and they all liked that. There was another guy called Joe de Hovsepian, who's in the book, who I wanted to be in the film, but he wanted to be paid $150,000 to appear in the film, because he said he made a mistake by granting me the interview for free. And I had to explain to him that you can't pay somebody to do an interview. And de Hovsepian, again, said things to me he just shouldn't have. About how America is the greatest terrorist nation on the planet, even though he was working for them. He was actually an intelligence asset for them, which a lot of arms dealers are. He also said to me at one point, now, you know, it's fairly obvious that I'm Jewish. A combination of my surname and my appearance doesn't make it a well-kept secret. And at one point in the conversation, de Hovsepian said to me, you know, if only Hitler had been allowed to finish his work, the world wouldn't have most of the trouble it has today. And I said, I couldn't believe he was saying this to me. And I said to him, can I quote you? And he said, of course you can quote me, otherwise I wouldn't have said it to you. And I couldn't figure out why this guy gave me this interview. And then I then realized, because I'd been contacting him for about 15 months before he agreed to be interviewed. He was 77, 78 at the time, and he'd been quite ill. These people think they do great good in the world. De Hovsepian started our interview by saying to me, I sell weapons to bring peace. And I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what, you know, if I'd had any courage, I would have said to him, actually, you sell weapons to anyone who'll pay you. And I think he was thinking about his legacy. And he wanted someone to write about all of the good stuff that he'd done in the world. Now, after the book came out, there are photos of him in the book. There's a lot about him in the book, including the statement about Hitler, and a lot of other very uncomplimentary stuff. He loves the book. I don't know whether it's because he's never actually read it, and he just likes the photos, because he gave us the photos. But every time a new edition has been published over the last 10 or 15 years, I get an email from the guy. He's now almost 90. I get an email from him. Congratulations on the Korean edition of the book. The book continues to go from strength to strength, a great document of the global arms trade. And I think, gee, dude, at least read it before you start writing this sort of stuff.
Are you sure it's not the secret?
Well, yeah. So, you know, they live in this, I mean, I think they are all to some extent sociopaths. And they don't realize the impact of what they're doing has on the world and on other people. And, you know, like you can see with Trump, they believe their own nonsense. He actually thinks forcing everything to be named after him is because he's such a great guy and the people want all of these things named after him. It's just, it's crazy. Did you? Yeah,
as a clinical psychologist, what's your diagnosis of Ricardo?
Sad. Ricardo is clearly totally delusional. Totally delusional. I mean, his grasp of reality is so tenuous. And he's totally convinced about whatever he's telling you. So even though, I mean, he didn't know this, but I knew about his wife here and his wife in Britain. He turns up one night when we were going to interview him, the night before we were meeting. It was his birthday. So we'd agreed to take him out for a meal. And he turned up with this young blonde woman. The first time we went into his office, there were 4 young blonde women sitting at the board table. Never told who they were, what they were doing. It was obviously his strategy. He thinks, you know, people go completely gaga if there are attractive women around them or something. as he says about how he does business. Which, I mean, with a certain type of person, sure, but I mean, it's an absurdity. It's a particularly gendered world, sort of view of the world that he has. But when we turn up at the restaurant, he has yet another very attractive young blonde woman with him, and he starts introducing her as his fiancée, and starts talking about, this was in, I think, October, that they're getting married in November, this is when they're going to start having children. And I'm like, I saw you 2 months ago and you never mentioned this woman, and now you're getting married. So at one point when he went to the bathroom, she didn't speak much English, she was from Belarus. And I sort of managed to ask her, how long have you known Ricardo? So she looked at her watch and she said about 2.5 hours. But for him, this is the world he's creating. And he thinks that he's convincing people about it. And I've met dozens of them the same. Menstorff-Puyi, he has this ridiculous office on the Ringstrasse. And before I was allowed into the building, his lawyer came out, this young woman, and said to me, you have to address him as the Count. If you don't call him the Count, he'll kick you out of his office. And I said, but I thought aristocratic titles were illegal in Austria. She said, yes, they are, but you have to call him the Count. So I go upstairs to this very beautiful office with like the highest ceilings I've ever seen. And he's showing me the pictures of all his ancestors on the wall. And he's telling me all their stories and all about them and everything else. And then I was talking months later to someone who knew him and who'd fallen out with him. And I said, but what about all these aristocrats? And this guy looks at me, he's not an aristocrat. He worked on a pig farm before he met his wife. And his wife made him, because he just went into business as an agent in the health business when she was the health minister, using her political contacts to sell. And then he got into the weapons business because it was more lucrative. And you think, he's got these portraits that are who knows whom, but not his family. And he's created this persona for himself, and he lives it. And you think to yourself, no, this is madness, no one does it. But then, in the White House, that's what's happening today. The guy actually believes the nonsense that he says about himself. And when he has thousands and thousands of people adoring him and telling him he's wonderful, you can understand it. And these people, the way they do it, they don't have political power, but they have financial power. They have a lot of money, so they pay people for anything they want. Okay, so the next thing we're going to move on to is very briefly the South African case that I investigated when I was a member of Parliament.
Came to South Africa specifically to lobby the BAE, the British weapons manufacturer, who won the biggest contract on our arms deal. And the option that they presented was 2.5 times more expensive than the plane that the South African Air Force actually wanted.
BAE Systems. Real performance. Real advantage.
As Mandela was about to step down from public life, his successor, Thabo Mbeki, made the decision to spend around $10 billion, what were quite scarce public resources, on this weaponry that we didn't need, rather than provide life-saving medication for the almost 6 million South Africans who were then living with HIV or AIDS. The primary reason for those deals was that around $300 million in bribes were paid to senior politicians and sadly to the African National Congress, the ANC, my own party. I was called in by a senior member of the ANC's National Executive Council. He said to me, look, Andrew, this is a battle you cannot win because this money, the bribes, were used to fund our 1999 election. And almost immediately, I'm asked to make a statement to the press that says there's nothing to investigate. So it's all over. I looked at him and I said, no, it's not. I won't be able to live with myself if I stop this investigation. But at the same time, I'm also realizing that this is the end of my political career. The heads of government are the salespeople in chief of their country's large arms contractors. And this is the template used by large defense contractors around the world.
So that statistic there gives you a sense of the opportunity cost of the arms trade. In post-apartheid South Africa, we had the highest pro rata level of HIV or AIDS in the world. We had over 2 million people without housing. We have an official unemployment rate of 37%. The unofficial unemployment rate is over 50%. And we spend $10 billion on weapons we have never used because we've never needed them. Yeah, how many countries want to go to war with South Africa since Mandela became our president? And the stuff just sits there. None of it gets used. The planes we bought for billions from BAE Systems haven't been flown enough every year to be operational. So if somebody attacked South Africa today, which they're not going to do, we wouldn't be able to use those jets. But we've paid for them. And that was all about funding a political party. Because Thabo Mbeki was so determined to do better in our second democratic election than Nelson Mandela had done in our first. And it was the point at which South Africa lost its moral compass. But more importantly, it was a policy choice between weapons or antiretroviral medication, which Mbeki wouldn't allow through the public health system because he said we didn't have the money, that led to 365,000 avoidable deaths in a period of 5 years. And in each one of those 5 years, 32,000 babies being born HIV positive because we couldn't afford mother-to-child transmission treatment. Now, you can place that in any other context you want. In most of Europe, we're seeing massive increases in defense spending because we're told Russia is a threat. In the United States of America, we're about to see the first annual defense budget go over $1 trillion, and that excludes all of the costs for actual conflicts. So for the money that's going to Israel, the money that's being used in Lebanon, the money that's being used in Iran, that's excluding all of that amount of money. In Britain, under my MP, Keir Starmer, we have seen our defense budgets go up by £3.4 billion a year. And in fiscal 2027, they will go up by £13.4 billion in a single year. In a single year. And this is at the time when Britain faces a massive cost of living crisis. I live in central London in an area called Camden Town. 40% of children in Camden Town live in poverty. But we're spending this money on defense. 40% of all of that money goes into the bribes. So it isn't going to make anybody safer, even if increased defense spending did make one safer, which it doesn't, but that's a whole nother story. So the economics of this trade are just insane. But then we can't look at the trade in weapons, especially at the moment, without looking at the unique role that Israel plays in this trade. And that's what we do, amongst other things, in this next case.
Every 2 years or so, the Israeli military attacks the Gaza Strip, and right after there is a trade show. in which Israeli weapon companies show their technologies. All of these Israeli companies, which are becoming an increasingly important and very significant part of the Israeli economy, depend on those wars. The first thing that they say when they try to market, we've already used that on actual human beings. By making that claim, they're able to compete with weapon manufacturers from other countries. The United States is the biggest supplier of military aid to Israel. This attack on Gaza is also a trade show for the United States arms industry.
Iran and ISIS are competing for the crown of militant Islam. One calls itself the Islamic Republic, the other calls itself the Islamic State. Both want to impose a militant Islamic empire, first on the region and then on the entire world. They just disagree among themselves who will be the ruler of that empire. In this deadly Game of Thrones, there's no place for America or for Israel.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
This was a very difficult negotiations, and part of it is because of this entrenched and compounded mistrust that we have built between ourselves mutually for the last 3-4 decades. But I'm happy that reason prevailed, diplomacy prevailed. People exercise a great deal of restraint and patience and wisdom, and we are where we are, and I hope this will be a good beginning.
As this nuclear deal goes through, we're still dealing with the problem that the states of this region are collapsing. And the void that they will fill, you will see more violence and you will see more weapons. It is important to understand that that's not a result of this deal. That is a result of the paradigm not shifting towards demilitarization and collective security soon enough.
The Saudis and the Israelis are on the same page. They worry about Iran. And can they do anything? And that's not new. They've been worried for a long time. But can they do anything about it? Well, they can get their own weapons.
This is the region that has more arms per capita than any other region in the world. Much thanks to the defense industry, Israel and some of the Arab states are going to be able to buy more weapons and more advanced weapons. If the nuclear threat from Iran is decreasing, why should these other countries get a chance to actually arm themselves more?
Pakistan is a friend of Saudi Arabia. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Are you in discussions with Pakistan about perhaps getting a nuclear bomb from Pakistan?
But Wolf, we've known each other for 25 years. You don't really expect me to answer this question.
We're not going to have a truly demilitarization in the region unless Israel's nuclear arsenal also is addressed. The significance of this peace deal is that it is a game changer in the region. And it's going to be a question about the political willingness of leaders to whether they will pursue these opportunities or whether they will fall into the patterns of the past.
Once you start a war, you open a kind of Pandora's box. You don't control it, it controls you. The use of that kind of violence has unforeseen consequences that no one can predict, and it propels you in directions you never thought you'd go. That's what war does. So the images of war are very carefully controlled and countered by the lies that have been disseminated through every institution in society, schools, government, entertainment, the press. When you shatter the myth, And when you understand especially what techno-war, industrial war is about, which is really about murder, about slaughter, people would be so repulsed, it would be very hard to wage war.
El siglo XX, que nació anunciando paz y justicia, murió bañado en sangre y dejó un mundo mucho más injusto que el que había encontrado. El siglo XXI, que también nació anunciando paz y justicia, está siguiendo los pasos del siglo anterior. Ya en mi infancia yo estaba convencido de que todo lo que en la Tierra se perdía iba a parar a la Luna. Sin embargo, los astronautas no han encontrado en la Luna sueños peligrosos, ni promesas traicionadas, ni esperanzas rotas. Si no están en la Luna, ¿dónde están? ¿Será que en la Tierra no se perdieron? ¿Será que en la Tierra se escondieron y están esperando?
Chris Hedges, the New York Times correspondent, formerly knew, he was fired because he spoke out against the invasion of Iraq. He had actually been jailed in Saddam's Iraq, and he was still in jail there when the Americans started bombing. And the way he got out of jail is one of the bombs hit the jail, and all the prisoners escaped, including him. So he gets back to America. He's clearly not a fan of Saddam. And he writes an opinion piece about why the attack on an invasion of Iraq is wrong and will lead to even greater trauma, killing and tragedy for the Iraqi people and to a deepening of what the West claimed its war on terror was supposed to be fighting. And he was fired. But he says there that, you know, if people actually saw the images of war, they wouldn't allow war to continue in our name and with our tax money. And this is what Gaza is doing. Because it is the first live-screen genocide, as much as our governments and our commercial media are telling us there's not a genocide happening, as much as they're telling us it's anti-Semitic to be critical of Israel or even to call it a genocide, we can now see with our own eyes. And that's why even in the places where support for Israel is most crucial, America in particular, support for Israel amongst most Americans, and particularly, very interestingly, amongst younger American Jews under the age of 37, support for Israel is collapsing. And it's because we can see what Israel is doing every day on the ground in Gaza. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I lived through the late apartheid years in South Africa, which were pretty awful. But I never imagined that I would ever see a live screen genocide in my lifetime, in which most of our governments were at best complicit, at worst active participants. And what is regarded as a crime is protesting them, or taking the perspective that we don't want to be a part of that we don't want it in our names. What was so crucial about bringing change to South Africa, which didn't happen quickly. You know, some people, especially those of you who are a bit younger, think, oh, you know, Mandela sort of jumped out of prison and was president 2 minutes later. Our struggle against apartheid had gone on since 1652, when colonizers first arrived on the southern tip of Africa. We gained a partial liberation in 1994. South Africa today is the most economically unequal country on the planet. It's become less equal since our democracy in 1994, astonishingly. So we have only one part of the struggle, because we now have a racialized system of massive income inequality, and therefore people's life opportunities are simply different based on the color of their skin. But at least we've achieved something. The worst iniquities of the apartheid system have now gone. And what was absolutely crucial to the achievement of that liberation was two things. On the one hand, there was just wave after wave of industrial strikes through the country from the mid to late 1980s. On the other hand, the BDS movement internationally went to a totally different level in the 1980s. For those of you who are more my sort of generation, you'll remember the concerts for Mandela. You remember the fact that so many of us all over the world were protesting outside South African embassies. We're encouraging people not to buy any South African produce. We're not using Shell service stations because Shell provided oil for the apartheid military. We're boycotting Barclays Bank and JP Morgan in the United States of America. And those things, that international solidarity, was absolutely vital. And exactly the same thing is required in the struggle to liberate Palestine. And it sounds almost horrific to say this, and I don't want it to sound disrespectful. But the one thing that this indescribably awful genocide has done is it started the process of the beginning of the end of the state of Israel as we and it knows itself. The Israeli economy is in a state of profound collapse. And no American president, even one as self-delusional as Donald Trump, is going to provide the hundreds of billions of dollars that are going to be required to get it back to its pre-genocide levels. And that was the beginning of the end of apartheid South Africa. And if we intensify international boycott movement and sanction movement, we can play a role in ensuring that that economy never recovers. And that is going to be the route to change in Palestine. So even at this moment of horrific darkness, there are just little shards of light. And we, as activists around the world, have a responsibility to those who've been slaughtered to do whatever we can to ensure that their murder, their deaths, were not totally in vain. I'm going to stop talking now so that if you have any comments, any questions,
der direkt zum YouTube-Link von dem Film führt. Für alle die sich ihn komplett anschauen wollen. Also, ja, vielen Dank, Andrew Feinstein, für diese interessanten Einblicke in den globalen Waffenhandel. Und ich glaube, viele von uns werden jetzt sicher motiviert sein, den ganzen Film anzuschauen.